You're listening to Me and Paranormal You with your host, Ryan Singer. It's more fun to believe. Third year bonus. Good afternoon, good evening, and good morning to you. Good is a relative term, I suppose. How are you doing? You hanging in there? I didn't think we'd have to go through this again, like we did 8 years ago. And yet, here we are, reconciling how people we know, people that are related to us, can view the world so differently, can, in my opinion, choose fear and hate over love and acceptance. Have they been scared so badly by progress that they retreat into ways and tropes of the past? I suppose in my opinion, the answer is clear. I hope you're doing okay. Today will be an effort to, I retreat into the past looking for answers, looking for explanations. I don't have them. I don't have answers for you. I do know what that the answer is not. The answer is not rage and violence. Now, there are people who will tell you you're not paying attention if you don't become enraged or boil over in a way that will lead to, extreme anger and violence. And, violence begets violence. I do believe that, and I don't believe that is the answer. That is not to say that you are not allowed to go through I guess it would be the grieving process, and anger is part of that. Please don't deny yourself these moments where you can feel some righteous anger. And, I could not sleep last night. It was probably 4:45 in the morning, 5 a.m. before I was able to just exhaustively fall asleep, kind of baffled in disbelief, quite frankly. Luckily, I had an appointment with my therapist at 11 a.m. this morning. So I am lucky that I had that. I hope you have people to talk to if you're feeling that way. And if you're celebrating the victory, I guess that's you. That's you. And I don't understand where you're coming from. That's for sure. But I'm trying to love all people, regardless of how different they are from me. And I will say this. I started reading a book that was gifted to me by Beth, who owns Viewpoint Books, probably a year and a half ago. It was gifted to me. It's called Humankind by Rutger Bregman. You've probably heard of this book, potentially. It is a huge book filled with stories of hopeful humanity. I think I waited just in time to start this book because I couldn't have picked a better night to start reading a book that the fundamental message is that, all human beings are decent. And, there might be some psychopaths out there, right? Obviously, might. But the underlying message is that there is a common bond of decency, and it actually speaks to the reactions of human beings on a mass scale. And we're going to get into some of the details of that just a little bit later, but because it directly ties into, the paranoia of what happens if UFOs show up in the sky, et cetera, how everyone's like, oh, you can't tell, the government can't tell everybody UFOs, they'll freak out. And when in fact, human history has proven that human beings react in the exact opposite way of that human beings take on the challenge. They don't look out for themselves like Richard Dawkins. I read The Selfish Gene 20 some years ago. The book is very compelling, but he's missing the point. I believe he's missing the point. And, case studies have shown that human beings do not behave in that way. And there's even a term for it. So we're going to get to that in a little bit. Oh, God, it's tough not to feel all the feelings today. But I want you to know I'm not I'm not immune to this. I try my damnedest to operate from a viewpoint of love and understanding, and I often fail, and that's just part of life. I will do my damnedest to try to live the life I see myself living, and every once in a while we stumble from that. But 4 more years of the orange clown and disruption and chaos. Potentially, we'll see what happens. Will he surprise us and actually be a compassionate person with empathy? Chances are 0, probably, of that, but I'm not trying to manifest that either. I'm just taking a break from anybody I know that voted for him. I just won't be talking to them for a little while until I cool my jets. I don't have space for that right now as I work through this and get to a place where I can be the person I want to be. I want to read to you from Shamanism by Mircea Eliade, Archaic Techniques of Ecstasy. This is a seminal book written on the subject of shamanism, all kinds of case studies. Basically, it's one of the books about shamanism and the history, and actually understanding its origins and what it is. And I just want to read you a little excerpt because it's just one of those kind of days. And this is Tribal Initiations and Secret Societies. This is from page 64. We have several times observed the initiatory essence of the candidate's death followed by his resurrection. In whatever form this takes place, ecstatic dreams, sickness, unusual events, or ritual proper. Indeed, ceremonies implying passage from one age group to another or admission into some secret society always presuppose a series of rites that can be summarized in the convenient formula: death and resurrection of the candidate. We will enumerate the commonest of these rites. A period of seclusion in the bush, symbol of the beyond. That's what the bush is. And the larval existence, like that of the dead, prohibitions imposed on the candidates by the fact that they are assimilated to the dead. A dead man cannot eat certain dishes or cannot use his fingers, etc. B. Face and body daubed with ashes or certain calcareous substances to obtain the pallid hue of ghosts. Funerary masks. C. Symbolic burial in the temple or fetish house. D. Symbolic descent to the underworld. E. Hypnotic sleep. Drinks that make the candidate unconscious. F. Difficult ordeals. Beatings, feet held close to a fire, suspension in the air, amputations of fingers, and various other cruelties. All these rituals and ordeals are designed to make the candidate forget his past life. This is why, in many places, when the novice returns to the village, he acts as if he had lost his memory and has to be taught all over again to walk, eat, dress. Usually the novices learn a new language and have a new name. During their stay in the bush, the rest of the community considers the candidates dead and buried, or devoured by a monster or a god, and upon their return to the village regards them as ghosts. Morphologically, the future shaman's initiatory ordeals are of the same order as this great class of passage rites and ceremonies for entering secret societies. It is sometimes difficult to distinguish between tribal initiation rites and those of a secret society, as is the case in New Guinea, or between rites for admission to a secret society and those of shamanic initiation, especially in North America. In any case, in all these instances, there is a quest for powers by the candidate. There are no rites for passage from one age group to another in Siberia in Central Asia, but it would be wrong to attribute too much importance to this fact and to deduce certain consequences from it in regard to the possible origin of Siberian rites of shamanic initiation. And there's more, and it goes on. Not anyone who wants to do so can become a medicine man. A vocation is indispensable, and this vocation is manifested above all by the unusual capacity for ecstatic experience. The unusual capacity for ecstatic experience. Anyway, when we come back, we're going to talk a little more about the initiatory experience of the shaman and the quest and all this stuff. And then, we'll get into the nocebo effect as well. Patreon.com/Ryan Singer. No commercials over there. $3 a month. And I'm back. I hope you're back as well. So, let me just put a bow on that, what we were talking about. We were talking, I was reading an excerpt from Shamanism by Mircea Eliade. Anyway, from the section Tribal Initiations and Secret Societies, and we were talking about the rites, or the most common of the rites. Finally, let us know that the myth of renewal by fire, cooking, or dismemberment has continued to haunt men even outside the spiritual horizon of shamanism. Medea succeeds in having Peleus murdered by his own daughters by convincing them that she will restore him to life rejuvenated as she did a ram. And when Tantalus kills his son Pelops and serves him at the banquet of the gods, they resuscitate him by boiling him in a pot. Only his shoulder is missing, Demeter having inadvertently eaten it. The myth of rejuvenation by dismemberment and cooking has also been handed down in Siberian, Central Asian, and European folklore, the role of the blacksmith being played by Jesus Christ or certain saints. So how does one obtain shamanic powers? Well, we have seen that one of the commonest forms of the future shaman's election is his encountering a divine or semi-divine being who appears to him through a dream, a sickness, or some other circumstance, tells him that he has been chosen, and incites him thenceforth to follow a new rule of life. More often, it is the souls of his shaman ancestors who bring him the tidings. It has even been supposed that shamanic election was connected with the ancestor cult. But as L. Sternberg rightly remarks, the ancestors themselves had to be chosen at the dawn of time by a divine being. Being chosen at the dawn of time by a divine being. What's interesting here is, at least to me, let me put this book somewhere, is that what you have here, you have, seemingly supernatural attributes and details of, the initiation, the being chosen, the election, etc., etc. And to be clear, I'm not trying to tie this into a presidential election, right? That apparently had no foul play this time because of the way the results turned out, which is convenient. But what we have here, stories are important. And, there was a while where I was on a huge kick where everything is just a story, right? And I do still believe that everything is a story. And what is the story we're telling ourselves? Clearly, there's a very powerful story that's being told by Seemingly the majority of this country. And it is a story that I don't tell myself. It's a story that I don't listen to. It's a story I don't believe. And they would say the same thing about the story I'm telling myself. I have lots of stories I tell myself that I would assume the majority of people don't tell themselves. That's just part of being in the paranormal world and having experiences outside the parameters of what other people's stories include or are willing to consider, I should say. Now, what you have is a powerful underlying pattern here, that when it is a shaman is chosen from a power beyond, right? A divine being, it's a calling, it's an ancestor, you're born into it. And then there are initiatory rites that you go through. There's a quest. There is struggle. There is pain. There is learning. There is coming out better. It is the hero's journey, as Joseph Campbell would say, and as Bernie Taylor would lay out for you in, the cave art from our most ancient past. Although, how ancient is our past, I've been going down a Mark Macy rabbit hole, and according to the Seven and, and the puzzle that he has been putting together for years, it could be much more ancient than we even believe. But nonetheless, we can't get into that today. I'm still trying to wrap my brain around some of that stuff. So, any hoodles, there are powerful stories, and there are components and details of stories that it doesn't matter if you're talking about someone who thinks they should be a leader or a shaman or any other kind of person of interest that catapults to prominence in some kind of way. There is some kind of, they were born for this kind of aspect. Oh, they're so naturally gifted as this thing, right? Now, is it an athlete? Is it a comedian? Is it an actor? Is it a politician? There is this fundamental story that people are chosen, right, and are anointed as such by something beyond, just the reason and the logic of man. And the reason and the logic of human beings could be faulty at times. I think we can all agree on that. Now, why do we love this so much? And why does it resonate with us so much? Well, one could argue that we don't want to do the heavy lifting. We enjoy when someone else comes around who is naturally gifted or cosmically anointed or chosen, for a task that can do, quote unquote, the heavy lifting. And the heavy lifting of leading or of educating, etc. We love that, don't we? I love it. I'm not going to act like part of me doesn't love that. I was unabashedly all in on the Bernie Sanders train, thinking he would be a savior of sorts. And that was a huge fault and flaw in me to think that. I was giving away my power. I was surrendering my power to something outside of myself, not understanding that is the last thing any of us should be doing. Surrendering our power, wanting a savior. Now, you could say the whole Christian, or religious in general, organized religion in general, that's what they're doing. I was raised Catholic and Christian, and I'm not a part of that anymore. But they're surrendering their power, right? And they have an outside savior. That's not to say that it doesn't, I guess, work for certain things. I mean, if you're in a 12-step program, I mean, that's part of it. Surrendering power. There's people who have quit drugs and other addictions by surrendering to something bigger than themselves, and that's not. I'm not judging that one way or the other. But when we give away our power and we start forgetting that it is, at the end of the day, it is us who does things, and it is us who accomplishes things. When we forget that, I think we do ourselves a disservice. And, watch any football game and an interview after the game, they'll be like, I'd like to thank God for blah, blah, blah. God doesn't give a shit about your football game. Sorry to break that news to you, but nonetheless, that's what they do. And whether they're just doing lip service or whether they actually believe it, I don't really give a shit. But the point is, we are surrendering our power, and we've been doing that for quite a long time. And I think that's the gig, right? When people talk about, they don't want you to be blah, 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 all the conspiracy stuff, maybe it all boils down to, taking away the power from the individuals. And I don't know. Who knows? We're going to be right back. We got one more short break here. We're going to be right back with more. And we have returned. So what is it that I guess Rutger Bregman in the book Humankind, which is a New York Times bestseller, subtitle Hopeful History. What is the premise of this, and what is the combating part, or not the combating, but what is the other side of the coin here, right? Like, we must give away our power, or we must we love when other people do the heavy lifting for us. We are but mere mortals who can't be expected to transcend our animal instincts, and we can't be counted on for much, because we're all going to devolve back into our basest form when shit hits the fan. That's basically the message that's out there, right? And it's a message that's believed, and it's been propagated, and it's been spread around constantly. And you hear that also in the, in the UFO, if aliens showed up. And this is why we can't tell people there'd be widespread pandemonium and panic, and it's all bullshit. And we've been calling bullshit on that on this show for a while. And, whether or not you believe that, I guess that's up to you. I believe it over here. And human beings have been underestimated. We have and who has done the underestimating except ourselves? We have underestimated ourselves for so damn long, right? We, in some form or another, have survived ice ages, cataclysmic events on the globe. Like, we're still here. We persevere. We make it. And how do we do that? We do that by group work. We do that by community, and we do that by helping one another. No human being ever survived. Human beings aren't here because one guy did whatever he had to do to survive at all costs. Yeah, because we're not those frogs. We can't just have babies alone. What we have is a community, and we have a sharing and uplifting. Humans are social creatures. We, as my buddy Dave would say, we work better together. And these differences are perceived, and they're superficial. And the fragmentation of identity to the point of using it as barriers between connection can be troubling. And all you have to do is look at the commercials during any election cycle, and you see who's trying to give you a plan for the future and who's trying to scare you into wanting to hold on to the past. It's love versus fear is clear, and more people, which I just can't believe that for the first time, I think since 2020 years, more people chose fear. And yes, it's much more complicated than that, sure, right? But at the end of the day, to me, it's pretty simple. Boils down to love and fear. And the fear of the human animal breaking into chaos mode, animal mode, that has been one of the things that Bregman is arguing in this book, at least the premise of the book. And again, I just started reading this thing. He's saying that's been propagated falsely. And I've only, read so far into this book, but there's enough case studies that I've read already, or examples already, that, it becomes clear. It becomes clear that this isn't true. 9/11 in New York City. People, and if you've read this book, you know these things. People calmly and in an orderly fashion, walking down the steps, trying to make other people go in front of them. No, you go, no, you go, no, you go, even though they know they face certain death. Calmly. They're not trampling each other, trying to get down the steps, saving themselves at all costs. That's not what happened. The proof is in the human pudding. And the human pudding, guess what? It's fucking delicious and it's decent. That's the message that's being laid out in this book. There's a story about a real life Lord of the Flies situation that happened. And guess what these kids did? They did it right. For 15 months, they didn't descend into some, killing each other bullshit like William Golding wrote in The Lord of the Flies, which he won a Nobel Prize for that book. I mean, that story has been repeated and repeated and repeated. It's become folklore. It almost has become like part of our DNA as animals. This is what we'll do. When, many people would credit that book for the creation of reality television in general, like shows like Survivor and, The Real World, all this other stuff. Put them together, isolate them, and watch them eat each other alive, kind of thing. And it's all bullshit. It's all manufactured by producers, creating drama, creating intrigue, editing things together to create conflict. I have this conversation, and it's an argument with friends all the time about like TV shows, and they're like, "Oh, but we need conflict. We need to have people want conflict." Yeah, maybe people enjoy watching conflict on TV, but it's manufactured and it's bullshit. Why not give them something that is more representative of the reality of what human beings are? This delicious, decent pudding, right? Why can't we serve some decent pudding up? No, and our studio's going to buy that. Who knows? Maybe they won't. Who gives a shit, really, though? Anyway, so this is what he's laying out. And it's interesting because there's like one psychological, there's one paper, or there's a book called The Psychology of the Masses by one of the most influential scholars of his day, Frenchman Gustave Le Bon. And Hitler read this book, Churchill read this book, everybody read this book, and they believed it. And basically what Le Bon was saying is people will descend several rungs in the ladder of civilization. Panic and violence erupt as we humans reveal our true nature. That's how we respond to crisis, was the theory, right? And guess what? It was proven incorrect over and over and over again, yet people, human beings, will cling to this belief that we will descend the ladder during moments of crisis, when in fact we help each other. We become selfless, not selfish. We become selfless. And there were lies spread during Hurricane Katrina about crazy stuff happening, when in fact the truth was, the truth was the opposite. It was people helping each other, and the lies were debunked sometime after, shortly, and then later on after, about the lies that had spread about what people were doing to one another during this very tragic, the greatest natural disaster in the history of the United States, if I'm not mistaken. It's widely considered that. And people came together, they banded together, and they helped each other. Why? Because people are decent, delicious pudding. People are delicious and decent pudding. People are, even chocolate. I don't like chocolate pudding. That almost sounded like I was saying I don't like black people, but you know what I mean. Chocolate's not my favorite flavor, but guess what? It's a delicious, decent pudding. I should be editing this out probably, but I'm not going to. This is what it means to be human. We have foibles. Every flavor of pudding is decent and good, right? And see, that's what we don't think about, because we've been presented chaos, right? And we've been presented and told and shown that we aren't decent pudding. We're crazy unpredictable animal pudding, when in fact we're decent pudding. That's what I'm trying to get at here. And this is one of the things I'm trying to hold on to, right? And it's not like I even have to try to hold on to it, because it's factual. So it doesn't matter if I want to hold on to it or not. It remains true. Bregman writes, when put to the test, the theories set forth by celebrated crowd psychologist Gustave Le Bon could hardly have been further off the mark. Crisis brought out not the worst, but the best in people. If anything, the British moved up a few rungs on the ladder of civilization. This is talking when Germany and Hitler incessantly bombed them to try to break their spirit. An American journalist confided in her diary, quote, continue to be astonishing that the British, the courage, humor, and kindliness of ordinary people continue to be astonishing under conditions that possess many of the features of a nightmare. And so what did Churchill and his crew do? Mostly because his close friend Friedrich Lindemann, also known as Lord Cherwell, just lied about the results of a study that they had done in a report, and because he refused to believe that they couldn't send the German people into chaos a few rungs down the ladder. So they did the same thing, but even worse. And guess what had happened? The same results that happened with the British people. It made the German citizens come together and even become more productive. The war would have been over sooner, many people argue, if they had not done that. Anyway, we're going to get into more decent pudding when we get back. So after this short break. And we're back. This is your buddy Ryan Singer. We're talking about how people are delicious, decent pudding. And we're fighting against the idea that, that we're not, all of us, right? Regardless of who we may have voted for, et cetera, people are good, delicious, decent pudding. Regarding Hurricane Katrina, there were results of like rape and murder and all this other shit, right? And it turns out it was all lies. And let me read you a little excerpt about the debunking of that was happening in real time, which made the National Guard actually enter into the area slower because of the BS that was being propagated by the journalists. They actually were slower to respond and get service to people because they were trying to, take extra caution to protect themselves, when in fact it wasn't needed at all. It wasn't until months later, when the journalists cleared out, that the floodwaters drained away and the columnists moved on to their next opinion, that researchers uncovered what had really happened in New Orleans. What sounded like gunfire had actually been a popping relief valve on a gas tank. In the Superdome, 6 people had died, 4 of natural causes, 1 from an overdose, and 1 by suicide, which is actually in direct contrast to what was being reported, that a child had their throat slit, which is crazy. That did not happen. The police chief was forced to concede that he couldn't point to a single officially reported rape or murder. True, there had been looting, but mostly by groups that had teamed up to survive, in some cases even banding with police. Researchers from the Disaster Research Center at the University of Delaware concluded that, quote, the overwhelming majority of the emergent activity was pro-social in nature. A veritable armada of boats from as far away as Texas came to save people from the rising waters. Hundreds of civilians formed rescue squads, like the self-styled Robin Hood looters, a group of 11 friends who went around looking for food, clothing, and medicine, and then handing it out to those in need. Some people who were doing this were shot on a bridge, and I think it was 5 officers were convicted and sentenced to lengthy sentences for killing them. The hurricane confirmed the science on how human beings respond to disasters. Contrary to what we normally see in the movies, the Disaster Research Center at the University of Delaware has established that in nearly 700 field studies since 1963, there's never been total mayhem. It's I'm combining two words. It's never every man for himself. Crime, murder, burglary, rape usually drops. These things decrease during these times of crisis. People don't go into shock. They stay calm and spring into action. Whatever the extent of the looting, a disaster researcher points out, it always pales in significance to the widespread altruism that leads to free and massive giving and sharing of goods and services. Catastrophes bring out the best in people. I know of no other sociological finding that's backed by so much solid evidence that's so blissfully ignored. The picture we're fed by the media is consistently the opposite of what happens when disaster strikes. And he goes on to write how those persistent rumors were actually costing lives, like I alluded to or actually mentioned a little bit. This is where it gets a little bit interesting as well. When you're talking about so here it is. So, true, the disaster in New Orleans was an extreme case, he goes on to write. But then he says, he quotes from another author's book, quote, "My own impression," writes Rebecca Solnit, whose book A Paradise Built in Hell from 2009 gives a masterful account of Katrina's aftermath, quote, is that elite panic comes from powerful people who see all humanity in their own image, end quote. Dictators and despots, governors and generals, they all too often resort to brute force to prevent scenarios that exist only in their own heads, on the assumption that the average Joe is ruled by self-interest, just like them. So there you have it, right? Yeah, I mean, that's just, this is literally a glimpse looking through binoculars at the tip of an iceberg, let alone, it's not even the tip of an iceberg. He goes on to talk about the nocebo, which is kind of the opposite of a placebo, where you can kind of suggest to people that they'll get sick, and they will get sick. They'll feel sick. They'll have real symptoms. How there's even placebo surgeries that have been carried out where they put someone under anesthesia. They do no surgery whatsoever for like a back surgery or something like that. And 50%, if not 75% of people feel relief and that it works for them. The mind, right? What's the story we're telling ourselves? And the more intense the story, the more effective the placebo. That's why they're saying injections and even surgeries are more effective than just taking a pill, because it seems more extreme. So the person, those of us who are having this done to us, this placebo surgery or injection, we feel it's more extreme and intense, so it'll be more effective. And in fact, it will be. These are the stories we're telling ourselves. And these stories become our truth. They become our reality. Bregman goes on to write, in science, too, the view that humanity is bad has reigned for decades. Look up books on human nature, and you'll find titles like Demonic Males, The Selfish Gene, which we referenced earlier, and The Murderer Next Door. Biologists long assumed the gloomiest theory of evolution. Even if an animal appeared to do something kind, it was framed as selfish. Familial affection? No. Nepotism. Monkey splits a banana? Exploited by a freeloader. As one American biologist mocked, what passes for a cooperation turns out to be a mixture of opportunism and exploitation. Scratch an altruist and watch a hypocrite bleed. And it's the same thing in economics. And these things have been published and perpetuated for decades and decades and decades. It's become part of the zeitgeist. It's become part of the mentality. How do we fight against How do we fight against slipping into the darkness? And this is a question I've been asking myself over and over and over again, especially in the last 12 hours. How do we stop ourselves from slipping into the muck and the mire of hopelessness? And what we do is we remember that at our core, most, if not all, human beings are decent. We are decent, delicious pudding. Even though we believe we're salty and flavorless pudding, ready to just splat everywhere at the first moment of panic or crisis. That's when in fact it's not true. So how do we further propagate the truth? How do we get the message out? I guess we be examples, and we talk about it more, and we write jokes about it. We write movies about happy endings, and showing people coming. These things do exist. In 2016, I couldn't watch anything after. I was so upset that I could only watch Pixar movies. And I might have like at least a few weeks of that again. Anyway, Moana 2 just came out, it looks like. So that's exciting. And Inside Out 2 as well. Great movies. We'll come back. We can talk more about the doctrine that humans are innately selfish, and how it's a hollow tradition in science, even though it's complete nonsense. We're going to be right back after the short break. And we're back. Are you delicious pudding? Are you decent, delicious pudding? I think you are. I don't know. I can't stop saying that. It's such a silly thing to say, but I think you are a very good, delicious pudding. I want you to know that. I hope you feel the same way about me. The idea, the cynical idea in this idea that human beings are salty, flavorless pudding, and our bad pudding it's not new. It's been around since the Greeks. It's been around forever. And so why did this story get shared? I don't know. Maybe he gets into that later in the book, but I haven't gotten there yet. But so why is it that's the story that we chose to run with? And many people would say, well, you can put on your tinfoil hat over here, and you can start talking about, well, that creates more of a need for law and order, doesn't it? We need law and order because everyone's innately bad and not decent. Christianity, you have original sin when you're born. What a load of bullshit, by the way. You're a baby and you're born with sin? Okay, give me a break, Jake. Not here for that. That's just one example. So even as a child, you were born with original sin. Like, people are not decent. People are bad. But then you examine the evidence, the stories, the real truth in history. People bind together. They come together. They help one another. They become selfish. No, they become selfless. So why is the other story told? I don't know. I tend to think, at least at this early stage of me discovering this and really trying to synthesize it, because that's my word of the month, of the last month, this information. It's because if people are innately bad, you need more law and order. You need someone who's there to protect you. There's a scarcity of resources. Don't you know that? And you should be scared because immigrants are coming across the border to take your resources from you. And I don't just mean your jobs and your money. I mean your children and your wives. Be afraid. That's what won the election. Trans people are getting surgeries in jail with your tax money. Your resources are being taken from you so they can have their dick cut off. Isn't that crazy? How woke they become? Be afraid because there's a scarcity of resources, when in fact it's the opposite. We have an abundance of resources, and one of those resources is human decency. You don't have to be afraid. People ask me why I love living in California, and the answer is pretty simple on many fronts. I have people in my family who can't even say the word California without almost throwing up in their mouth, and it's too bad for them because I love it here. Besides the weather, the landscape, the beach, the mountains, we're close to the desert, all the hiking trail, the emphasis on providing natural space for recreation. And that's not even talking about the immense diversity that is present here in a metropolitan area like the greater Los Angeles area. It is beautiful. It's amazing. People live together who are vastly different from one another. They exchange goods and services, even though they don't even speak the same language. It is beautiful. It's what being a citizen of the earth is like. Oh, you sound like you're talking about the New World Order. Oh, and the Illuminatis. The Illuminatis, right? So, yeah, people think New World Order. They think of like the billionaires running the world. This is crazy. Meanwhile, they vote for the guy who, the majority of people in this country, voted for a guy who's friends with billionaires, pals up with them and promises them even more money. Do you understand how people are just voting against themselves? That doesn't make any sense. There's a scarcity of resources. Not true. Not true at all. There's plenty of food. There's plenty of housing. There's an abundance of human decency that can be shown in moments of crisis and, in fact, is shown during these moments. There's also an abundance of fear, that is, an abundance of fear-mongering, I should say, that will make you believe that there is not an abundance of all these things. California makes it easier for people who are downtrodden to get services, social services that they need. I like that. I will pay more taxes. I will gladly pay more taxes so people have more access to services that they need when things aren't going great. I've been on food stamps before. I have used these services. And it wasn't that long ago where I was on food stamps. Social services are important. I'm happy to pay taxes for them. I'm happy to pay a higher tax that I can have my parks taken care of and preserved, and that social services are available. And is California perfect? Hell no, it's not. Is Los Angeles perfect? Far from it. But guess what? We're going above and beyond what like a place where I grew up would go, where it's much more difficult to get health care for if you're poor or if you're lower middle class. And it also is just cold there all the time, except for like 3 months of the year. So yeah, you can keep that. I'm gonna keep this over here. Anyway, so so maybe that is why, right? It's a power play. You can hold on to power if you make people believe they need you, because you're the only one capable of truly protecting them. And that's, I think, kind of what this whole election was about. And the price of eggs. It turns out democracy was undefeated until eggs got expensive. Okay. Democracy could withstand any outside force except the increase in the price of eggs and milk. Boy, oh boy. Well, come February, when eggs and milk are even more expensive, I guess a lot of people have to ask themselves, wait, what? But what? But why? But what? Yeah. Anyway. Will democracy survive? I guess literally only time will tell. And is it even democracy to begin with? That's a very good question. We got one more break, and we're going to come back, and we're going to put a bow on this bad boy. And just remember, there's some delicious, decent pudding out there inside of you, inside of everybody. And we're back. Thank you for listening to the program. I hope you're doing okay. Maybe do some box breathing, the 4 seconds, 4 seconds, 4 seconds, 4 seconds. Breathe in for 4 seconds, hold it for 4 seconds, exhale for 4 seconds. Don't breathe in for 4 seconds. Repeat over and over and over again. It's a very helpful technique to calm nerves, release anxiety, maybe feel a little more grounded. Get outside, take your shoes off, put them in the grass if you can for 15 to 20 minutes. Very helpful to do that as well. I mean, it's the little things, right? I had marked this, and I forgot to get to it earlier, and I will just put a bow on everything with this. This is from Chapter 7 in Shamanism, the book I read from earlier, Mircea Eliade. Shamanism in Central and North Asia. Magical cures, the shaman as psychopomp. I just want to read this because it's interesting, I think. The principal function of the shaman in Central and North Asia is magical healing. Several conceptions of the cause of illness are found in the area, but that of the, quote, rape of the soul, end quote, is by far the most widespread. And this is from C. Forrest Clement's Primitive Concepts of Disease writing. Disease is attributed to the soul's having strayed away or been stolen, and treatment is in principle reduced to finding it, capturing it, and obliging it to resume its place in the patient's body. In some parts of Asia, the cause of illness can be the intrusion of a magical object into the patient's body, or his, quote, possession, end quote, by evil spirits. In this case, cure consists in extracting the harmful object or expelling the demons. Sometimes disease has a twofold cause: theft of the soul aggravated by possession by evil spirits. And the shamanic cure includes both searching for the soul and expelling the demons. Obviously, all this is complicated by the fact of the multiplicity of souls. Like so many other primitive peoples, that's in quotes, by the way, and this is an old book, and especially the Indonesians, the North Asian peoples believe that man can have as many as 3 or even 7 souls. At death, one of them remains in the grave, another descends into the realm of shades, and a third ascends to the sky. But the same conception attested, for example, among the Chukchi of the Yukagir, is but one of the many ideas concerning the destiny of the 3 souls after death. Among other peoples, at least one soul disappears at death, or is eaten by demons, or the like. In the case of these latter conceptions, the soul that at death is eaten by evil spirits or descends to the land of the dead is the one that, during earthly life, causes illnesses by its flight. Only the shaman can undertake a cure of this kind, for only he, quote, sees the spirits and knows how to exorcise them. Only he recognizes that the soul has fled and is able to overtake it in ecstasy and return it to its body. Often the cure involves various sacrifices, and it is always the shaman who decides if they are needed and what form they shall take. The recovery of physical health is closely dependent on restoring the balance of spiritual forces, for it is often the case that the illness is due to a neglect or an omission in respect to the infernal powers, which also belong to the sphere of the sacred. Everything that concerns the soul and its adventure here on earth and in the beyond is the exclusive province of the shaman. Through his pre-initiatory and initiatory experiences, he knows the drama of the human soul, its instability, its precariousness. In addition, he knows the forces that threaten it and the regions to which it can be carried away. If shamanic cure involves ecstasy, it is precisely because illness is regarded as a corruption or alienation of the soul. So that's just a little extra. I mean, I think it's interesting here. What you have here is you have another outside authority here. And I'm not going to sit over here and act like I'm not pro-shaman all day. I'm like, all-time shaman over here. just always for it, or, fascinated by the calling, the history, the mythology, the lore, and the practice. But what you have here is a corruption of the soul, right? There's some kind of energetic malfunction or disruption happening, throwing us out of balance, throwing us off kilter, creating sickness, disease, problems, right? And how does that happen? What story are we telling ourselves, right, about how these things happen? These things take different forms. They take different stories. These stories have different characters, or have different names for the same character, I suppose. So if a placebo effect is possible, so just believing that we can be fixed or cured or helped by taking something, by ingesting something, by being injected by something, by stretching something, by doing something, by hearing a certain chant, by having a spell cast, etc. It sounds to me like it's intention. Sounds to me like it's intention followed by quote unquote practical action. So when intention is combined with action, oftentimes there are results. Oftentimes. That's not to say always, but oftentimes. So what intentions have we set, and what actions have we taken? Are we doing actions without intention? Are we setting intentions and not coupling them with action? Don't ask me that question, because the answer is a resounding yes oftentimes, and it's embarrassing. Okay. So what happens when we set intentions and we combine action to that intention? Whether you're doing a manifestation, meditation, a magical intention on a new moon to build and create, or a full moon to shed and release, what is the action that we're doing? We have an intention to stop feeling sick, so our action is to set an appointment at the doctor and go to the doctor and then get prescribed medicine. There's light at the end of the tunnel to get antibiotics. Our elbow hurts, so we set an intention to get checked out and maybe have a surgery to repair an injury. Let's not act like injuries don't happen. I think, you can break your leg, or you can pull a muscle, or you can rip, a tendon. These things happen, and they are real. And surgeries that are practical and very real occur, and healing then takes place, and hopefully and usually the person is better and the thing is healed and or fixed, or whatever, however you want to describe it. That's not to say that all of this is simply like some kind of story we've been telling ourselves, or figment of our imagination, etc., etc., even though everything in the world is actually just part of the imaginal world, right, or part of the thought verse. As an idealist, I do believe that some of these things are pretty solid, and though in our beliefs, and like by solid I mean you can hear me knocking on how much I believe this desk is solid with my hands, even though my hands never really touch, or something like that. Isn't that crazy? Anyway, so what's the intention? What's the action that follows the intention? And then what's the result from there? Do we, many people in magical practices will tell you have to release at that point. You have to detach from expectation of outcome. Maybe that has something to do with just trusting that something will work and something will happen. So, do you believe in the goodness and the delicious decency of the human pudding? And if you don't, what will it take for you to get your spoon and have a little taste and realize that it's delicious, decent human pudding? It's a process. I don't expect it to happen overnight. Not for me. not for anybody else. I don't have any expectations of other people when it comes to most things. And I don't mean that in a bad way because I don't believe in people. It just means I've got to figure out my own pudding. I can't be worried about other people's and have expectations on how their pudding should taste when my pudding, could use a little sugar, quite frankly. So, yeah. Well, we're going to be back next week. And I'm going to be talking about pudding again. I'm going to go to the store right now and actually get some banana pudding. All this talk about pudding has made me hungry hippos for some banana pudding with Nilla wafers. I hope you're doing okay. I hope you're finding comfort in community. I hope you have people that you can talk to and you can lean on. It's okay to cry. It's okay to be sad. It's okay to go through the grieving process. You don't have to, immediately put on your boxing gloves and join the fight. You're allowed to take some time for yourself, show some self-care. Regroup. Get some protein, maybe carb load, and find out which path you're supposed to be taking in this life moving forward. That's all we can do, I suppose. Well, I love you. I hope you love yourself. And, that's all we got as these pudding pods. We're these pudding pods, and we're all decent. Okay? Okay. I got some live shows in Los Angeles next week or so. The Fable on the 13th. I'll be in South Bay on the 19th. If you're in Los Angeles, come see a comedy show. Wow. I think we all need some laughs, don't we? If not, I'll see you at the watering hole on the astral plane.